Well, first of all, he really doesn't have any strategy here. He understands nothing about economics. He doesn't even understand how tariffs work. And I think it's pretty clear by now that that's the case. And I would like to think that somebody who purports to be an economist would at least admit that much. Because we have seen the backlash. We have seen that starting an unprovoked and unilateral trade war against some of our largest and most important trading partners has not worked out well for us or the global economy. Donald is a bully and he's a coward, which is why we have seen the backtracking, which is why we have seen, as you just pointed out, that China's strategy has actually worked for China, to China's benefit, because...
In a twist worthy of reality TV, Donald Trump's own niece just tore him apart like a bargain bin toupee caught in a hurricane. The meltdown was so intense. It made Chernobyl look like a lavender candle. Mary Trump didn't just spill tea, she tipped over the kettle, smashed it, and lit the tablecloth on fire. And Uncle Don? Let's just say his ego is now hunkered down in a bunker somewhere near his hidden tax returns. Buckle up, this family feud makes Thanksgiving dinner look like a cage match.
You write in your new book, the trouble with Donald had started long before he entered school. At home, he tormented his little brother Robert, a year and a half younger, and seemed to have nothing but disdain for everybody else, including, and perhaps especially, his mother. The kids in the neighborhood alternately despised and feared him. He had a reputation for being a thin-skinned bully who beat up on younger kids, but ran home in a fit of rage as soon as somebody stood up to him. I mean, it's fascinating to hear that description of a little boy and seeing the man.
That is one of the most damning and dangerous things about Donald Trump, and that is the thing that one of the things that makes him most unfit. He's never evolved from that. That's still...
Donald Trump just got verbally roasted by someone who shares his last name, unfortunately for him. Also a sliver of his DNA, yep. The relative from his own bloodline is dragging him harder than a cottage chain serves legal paperwork, if poetic. Justice had to mask it. It would be Mary waving a psychology degree in one hand and his latest indictment in the other.
Mary Trump is the niece of President Donald Trump, a clinical psychologist, author of Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. She describes Donald Trump as a sociopath who grew up in a dysfunctional family that fostered his greed and cruelty, which he is now inflicting on the world.
Granted, Trump getting roasted is nothing new, it's basically a weekly ritual. But getting flattened by his own niece, that's not just a roast, it's a family barbecue. And Donald showed up with a can of gasoline thinking it was BBQ sauce. Spoiler, he got smoked.
He turned to his next oldest son, Donald, who had no skills, no requisite skills to be an entrepreneur or to expand the business the way my grandfather intended. However, he did have a bunch of defense mechanisms that he had used to protect himself from his, quite frankly, bleak early years on the planet, that my grandfather found very useful. Donald's bullying, his grandiose sense of himself.
It's almost impressive, really. Here's a man who's built his whole image on being untouchable, flawless, and very stable. Then Mary shows up with a PhD and a scalpel, slicing through that paper-thin ego like it owes her alimony. She didn't bring a butter knife to this fight. She came armed with a chainsaw full of receipts, clinical analysis, and the kind of composed fury only a family member with long-term trauma can deliver.
Because why should they? I think the best thing for the rest of the world to do, especially given the fact that Donald's ridiculous and ultimately dangerous tariffs are going potentially to create a global recession if we aren't careful. There is literally no reason to work with the United States right now, and we see China exploiting the vacuum that we've left, and we see other countries willing to stand their ground and get to the point where the United States becomes isolated economically, which will be terrible.
Let's just take a moment to savor the irony. The self-proclaimed genius is now being publicly dismantled by someone who actually teaches other smart people how to spot narcissists in the wild. And she didn't need to study him for long. Her subject literally live-tweeted his symptoms in all caps for 4 straight years. His reaction? The usual cocktail of rage, blame shifting, and wild accusations, flung around like expired steaks at a Mar-a-Lago buffet. You could see it in his face, veins bulging, tie a deeper shade of orange than normal, hair doing that confused cotton candy flop it does when the humidity spikes. All he needed was a rattle and a juice box to complete the tantrum look. But this isn't just about bruised pride, it's about Trump finally meeting an opponent who knows exactly where the skeletons are hidden, because she watched him shove them behind the gold-plated fridge.
While going straight at Donald's vulnerabilities, the narcissistic injury she inflicted on him in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the debate did exactly what it needed to do, which, as you just said, was make him unravel. He couldn't recover. And honestly, he's not going to.
Mary didn't just call him out, she broke him down, piece by piece. This wasn't petty gossip, this was forensic. Think CSI, Dysfunctional Family Edition. She took the myth of Donald, the empire built on bluster and bankruptcies, and ran it through the psychological shredder with the steady hand of someone who's been studying this disaster since preschool. The best part, she doesn't yell, she doesn't sling nicknames. She just clinically explains why her uncle is basically a walking DSM entry in a red tie. Meanwhile, Trump is in his corner of the internet hammering the caps lock on the word fake like it's a magic spell to erase his lawsuits.
Did you ever hear Donald Trump, your uncle, use the N-word?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I know that sounds awful to put it that way, but when you live in a family, and you're a kid, it's not that I didn't know it was wrong. I did, because I lived a very different kind of experience growing up. I lived in Jamaica, Queens, which was, lower class, working class, and predominantly African American. I went to a school that was predominantly Jewish. So I didn't understand the animus, but it wasn't shocking because it's just the way it was. This is how adults in my orbit spoke and behaved. And now, of course, I learned a long time ago that it wasn't just something I disagreed.
Predictably, his diehard fans are spinning like broken weather vanes. They can't decide if Mary is a liar, a deep state plant, or some kind of PhD-wielding antichrist. In 5 minutes, the conspiracy theories cycle from she's bitter to this is all George Soros to Obama did it. Trump himself fell back into his toddler meets mob boss defense mode, tossing out lines like, she's jealous and she's irrelevant, as if trying to fistfight his own reflection. Mary, meanwhile, just keeps calmly dismantling him with surgical precision.
And now, of course, I learned a long time ago that it wasn't just something I disagreed with, but it was deeply wrong.
This is what really gets under his skin. Family isn't supposed to betray you. They're supposed to cover your tracks and pretend the gold-plated toilet is tasteful decor. But Mary didn't just speak out, she went full demolition derby in academic robes. She didn't whisper from the sidelines, she marched onto center stage with documents, a spotlight, and decades of I told you so energy. She didn't just toss him under the bus, she mapped out the crash, circled the blind spots, and reminded everyone that he handed her the keys himself.
I do, especially from 20 years ago, but even from 8 years ago. He has much less impulse control to the extent he ever had any. He is incapable of bringing a thought to conclusion. He goes off on tangents. And I think part of it is because he hasn't been pressed. He hasn't been challenged. And he's gotten away with so much. This is a man who spent his entire life pushing the envelope to see what he can get away with. And as soon as he realizes nobody's going to stop him.
Her takedown was part roast, part psychological autopsy, and part family reunion gone gloriously wrong. Trump's comeback? A barely coherent rant that read like it was typed between mouthfuls of fast food and ego pie. The man simply wasn't prepared for this hurricane, because you can't gaslight someone who has the receipts, highlighted the red flags, and double majored in your dysfunction. Mary grew up front row at the chaos factory, now she's the tour guide.
He's going to do anything in his power to make sure that doesn't happen. And we already see he's cheating already, by telling people that it isn't safe to vote by mail in the middle of a pandemic, by telling people that if Joe Biden wins, it will have been rigged. That's cheating. Because he's using the power of the Oval Office to get that message across.
Of course, his base tried to dismiss her like they do any inconvenient truth with memes, spelling errors, and whataboutisms involving Hillary's emails. But it's hard to discredit someone with the credentials of a clinical psychologist and the demeanor of someone who's been emotionally exhausted since the Reagan years. Mary didn't just shout into the void, she labeled it, categorized it, and handed the public a handbook on surviving narcissistic relatives.
His father was born in Germany. Can you understand why?
It's really fascinating what Donald gets wrong sometimes. It's difficult on occasion to know if he's doing it on purpose or not. So that confuses me. he used to say that he was Swedish. When asked what his ethnicity was, he would say Swedish because, the excuse given was that they worked with a lot of Jewish people, and they didn't want to offend them he didn't want to offend them by admitting to his German roots.
This is what happens when the so-called family black sheep turns out to be the only one. Who can see clearly, the rest are still lost in denial, pretending the fortune wasn't built on bad loans and worse decisions. But Mary switched on. The high beams and Donald bolted for the shadows, his counterattack, legal threats, petty insults, and the laughable I barely know her routine funny for someone who's spent holidays screaming at the cranberry sauce, watching him face real accountability is like watching a raccoon try to work a microwave loud, chaotic, and ending in flames.
Is essentially absent for almost a year. She had suffered very severe postpartum issues after my Uncle Robert was born that had gone undetected for so long that they were life-threatening. And that was the first major experience that shaped Donald. He experienced her absence as an abandonment. And my grandfather, who was a straight-up sociopath, was incapable and unwilling to fulfill the caregiver role. So Donald was very lonely and very frightened at an extremely crucial developmental period. So, he was never able to make up the deficits that occurred at that time.
Mary isn't chasing fame the way Trump claims she's doing something far more dangerous to him. Telling the truth, not the all-caps truth he declares on social media, but real truth, backed by evidence and psychological expertise. And it burns because deep down, he knows she's right. His anger isn't about lies, it's about her saying the quiet part out loud with proof. In Trump world, honesty is treason, logic is sabotage, and anyone not stroking his ego is part of some leftist coup.
I hope that more media outlets allow us to hear what Donald's actually saying instead of taking it upon themselves to quote unquote translate him. His nonsense is untranslatable. So what ends up happening, because human beings need to make meaning of things, is that certain reporters and journalists end up imbuing Donald's meaningless statements with meaning, so they don't seem as dangerous and, quite frankly, unhinged as they really.
Naturally, he's tried to flip the script, painting her as bitter, unstable, or irrelevant, which is rich, coming from a man who tried to buy Greenland and thinks Diet Coke is a health drink. Every insult he hurls just bounces back with his own name carved into it. The difference here, Mary's not a critic, she's a witness. Critics guess. Witnesses bring the files, the footnotes, and the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's seen it all.
Trump went to a military academy for high school. Explain why he went there.
I guess it would have been, middle school, I guess. His behavior started to become increasingly belligerent and uncontrollable. So, and it wasn't just at home, it was at school as well. He went to a small school in Forest Hills, which is actually the same school I attended when I was a kid. And my grandfather was on the board of trustees at that school. So I think on the one hand, my grandfather found it annoying that his son was creating problems in a school that he was associated with.
In the end, Trump being dismantled by his own niece isn't just poetic, it's the collapse of a facade under the weight of its own lies. Mary didn't need a megaphone, just the truth, a backbone, and a microphone. Trump, meanwhile, has a truth allergy, a shrinking fan base, and a meltdown collection fit for a museum. His worst betrayal isn't from courts, press, or voters, it's from his own blood saying enough. And for a man whose brand is built on loyalty and ego, that's the deepest cut of all.